Long before the kingdoms of men carved their names into the bones of Westeros, the land belonged to something older, creatures of mystery, beings of magic who breathed with the rhythm of the forests and danced beneath ancient stars. In the deep, wilds and primeval groves, the children of the forest lived and not quite seen, not quite forgotten, small, elusive, and bound to the pulse of the natural world in ways men would never fully understand. But that quiet balance shattered the day. A new presence crossed the sea, around 12,000 years before the reign of kings and thrones. The first men came. They crossed the narrow sea from Essos, stepping onto Westerosi shores not as pilgrims, but as conquerors. They carried with them bronze weapons and unyielding determinations, so unlike anything the children had ever known. These were not wanderers in search of harmony. They came with fire and blade, ready to take the land, not ask for it, and take it they did. Forests fell before them, sacred trees cut to make room for farms, settlements, and roads. With every axe stroke, the ancient song of the land grew fainter. The children of the forest, born of the earth and stars, fought back. They did not raise armies of men, they called upon the old powers. They turned the rivers and the trees against the intruders. Magic surged through the land like a storm. But for all their sorcery, the children were few, and the first men were relentless. Their numbers swelled, their cities spread. Westeros, once wild and whispering with the old tongue of nature, began to change. This was not merely a war of weapons. It was a war of worlds of beliefs and stories and ways of being. The first men carried with them new traditions, new gods, and the foundation of what would become the known world. And with every battle won, every forest felled, Westeros shifted, further from what it had been and closer to something forged by human hands. But it did not end in endless blood. Eventually, the toll of war grew too heavy. The endless fighting wore thin on both sides. And out of desperation, or perhaps wisdom, came something rare in those times: peace. On the Isle of Faces, a sacred truce was formed, known as the Pact. There, surrounded by the sacred wheel, the first men and the children of the forest agreed. They would share the land. The forests would remain the children's domain, untouched by axes and flame. While the first men could keep the lands they had already claimed, it was a fragile peace, but it held. Time softened the wounds. As generations passed, the first men did more than honor the pact. They began to absorb the ways of the children. They abandoned their foreign gods and turned to the old ones. The same deities whispered through weirwood leaves and sacred groves. This union of belief created something lasting, an ancient bond between the people of the North and the silent power that still lingers in the soil and stone. But even as peace settled over the realm, the legacy of conquest echoed on. The blood of the first men would birth the great houses. The old customs would shape the North's spirit, and somewhere far beyond the wall, something ancient and forgotten stirred. They had brought with them civilization, but they had awakened. Something else, something waiting, something cold. The arrival of the first men reshaped Westeros, but their conquest wasn't the only force to leave its mark. Far beyond their fires and villages, beneath the icy winds of the north, something older than even the children of the forest began to move. And with it came a shadow, a darkness that would one day consume everything. The long night, no one alive remembers exactly when it began, only that around 8,000 years before the age of dragons, Westeros fell into an age of darkness and cold that seemed to stretch forever. The sun vanished. For a generation, the world was held hostage by an endless winter. Crops failed, villagers starved. The snow crept southward, covering all of Westeros in a cold that seemed to whisper of death. And from the farthest reaches of the north, they came the others, the White Walkers, silent, unfeeling, beautiful in their terror. With them came death, not just death, but a mockery of life corpses risen in their wake, twisted by ice and unholy purpose. Their weapons were forged of frozen magic, their purpose simple, not conquest, but extinction. The phrase "winter is coming" was not always just a stark warning of seasonal chill. It was born from this, a memory of the end of all things. The first men, for all their fire and war, had never faced an enemy like this. Yet they were not alone. The children of the forest, their old enemies, stood with them. And in that most desperate of hours, they fought side by side, not as conquerors and defenders, but as the last living guardians of a dying world. It was the children who discovered the truth of the White Walkers' vulnerability. Not steel, not fire, but dragon-glass obsidian from the depths of the earth. Simple, black, deadly, with blades of it. The tide began to turn, but war was not won with weapons alone. Heroes rose figures, so great their names blurred into myth. One of them was Azor Ahai, a warrior who in many tellings wielded a sword of flame called Lightbringer. Whether man or legend, he came to symbolize the fire that pushed back the cold. Hope, carved in steel and blood. And beside these legends stood the first brothers of the Night's Watch, a sacred order born in the snow, sworn not to kings, but to the realm. They stood guard at the edge of the world, a living wall between life and the darkness beyond. In time, the White Walkers were driven back into the frozen wilds. The long night ended, but its shadow never faded. The stories endured, passed down as warnings, then as legends. The White Walkers were gone, but not destroyed, only sleeping, only waiting. And so the people remembered. The North remembered. The wall was their answer to ensure that darkness never returned. The first men and the children of the forest came together once more, not to fight, but to build. They created something vast, something that would stand not for years, but for millennia. The wall, stretching hundreds of miles across the northern edge of Westeros, it was a monument to survival, to fear, to vigilance. Rising over 700 feet into the sky, the wall was no mere structure of stone and ice. It was magic. The very bones of the earth sang through its foundations. Wards and spells whispered into the frost by the children themselves. And at the heart of its creation stood a man of myth, Bran the Builder. He would go on to found House Stark, raise Winterfell, and etch his name into legend. But it was the wall that was his greatest work. With the aid of giants, the children of the forest, and the will of the first men, Bran combined labor with sorcery to shape a barrier that would not just stand, but protect. It was more than architecture. It was intention and ancient power sealed into the stones, designed to hold back the very essence of death. And with the wall came its keepers, the Night's Watch, men in black. Bound by oath and honor, they stood vigil at the edge of the world. Nobles, thieves, orphans, and kings' bastards, they became brothers, united in solitude. Their lives were cold, their names forgotten. But they stood because someone had to. They were not just guards, they were memory, living reminders of a threat too terrible to forget, The wall marked not just the edge of the realm, but the line between light and dark, civilization and chaos, life and what lay beyond it. And though thousands of years would pass, the wall endured. But like all things, in Westeros, nothing lasts forever. Its power would be tested. The White Walkers were not gone, only silent, only watching, and the wall remembered. As the chill winds began to rise again in the north, so too did the ancient threat, creeping from the farthest corners of the frozen world, waiting for the moment to return. While the wall stood frozen in the north, guarding against forgotten nightmares, another force began to rise in the south, one not of ice and shadow, but of spirit and belief. The faith of the Seven. It would come to guide the hearts of kings, shape the laws of lands, and define the very soul of Westeros. But its roots were not of Westeros. Far across the sea, in the hills of the Andals, a vision was born. King Hugh of the Hill, once merely a chieftain, a man among many, claimed to receive a revelation. In his vision stood 7 divine beings, each a face of something greater: the father, the mother, the maiden, the crone, the warrior, the smith, the stranger. Together they formed the Seven, a single God with many faces, a faith of unity, of justice, of hope. The Andals embraced it, and with it came order, purpose and conquest. When they turned their gaze to Westeros, they brought more than swords and ships. They brought their gods, their faith, their future, and fire. They brought their faith. The Andals' invasion of Westeros was not merely a conquest of land, it was a crusade of belief. As they swept across the southern kingdoms, they carried with them the faith of the Seven, a religion foreign to Westeros, but destined to become its spiritual foundation. With every victory, they did more than topple kings. They converted the hearts and minds of the people. The first men, who had long worshipped the old gods beneath the whispering woods, began to turn their gaze toward the Seven. The old traditions, passed down through countless generations, were slowly pushed aside. The gods of forest and stone faded into silence as the Seven took their place in the hearts of the faithful. But the faith was more than prayer and ritual. It reshaped Westerosi life. With the Andals came not only new customs, but a codified system of laws and a formal religious hierarchy that became inseparable from the politics of the realm. The faith became a force both sacred and strategic. From its ranks rose the faith militant, a religious order armed with both sword and scripture. This brotherhood would one day wield as much power as any army, playing a pivotal role in the power struggles that would fracture the kingdom. At the heart of it all stood the High Septon, the supreme spiritual leader of the faith of the Seven. His voice could sway the masses. His blessing could legitimize kings or doom them. Over the centuries, the High Septons became among the most powerful figures in Westeros, their judgments echoing through the halls of lords and small folk alike. The Iron Throne and the Faith stood as twin pillars, often at odds, each vying for control of the realm's soul. But beyond its political weight, the faith of the Seven was a reflection of the human spirit. Each of its 7 aspects embodied a piece of life itself. The father stood for justice, the mother for nurturing care, the maiden for innocence and purity, and the crone for the wisdom of age. The warrior symbolized strength in battle, the smith, the dignity of labor, and the stranger, most mysterious, represented death and the unknown. These sacred faces touched every moment from birth to burial. They shaped how the people of Westeros saw their world and their place within it. As the faith deepened its roots, magnificent septs were raised, cathedrals of reverence where the devout gathered to pray, wed, or mourn. The rituals of the seven became woven into daily life. Weddings, coronations, and funerals unfolded under their sacred gaze, binding faith and tradition into one. Over time, the faith of the seven was no longer just a religion. It became the rhythm of life itself. Yet even as the faith spread across the land, it did not take root everywhere. In the north, where the first men had long ruled, the worship of the old gods endured. The godswood and the werewoods remained sacred. The northerners held fast to the ways passed down from the children of the forest and their ancestors. This divides between the old gods of the north and the seven of the south became a quiet fault line in the ever-changing history of Westeros. And so, as kingdoms rose and fell, the faith of the seven endured. Like the wall in the north, it stood as a foundation, timeless, revered, and unshaken. But like all things in Westeros, it could also become a battlefield of its own. For though the faith preached unity and peace, its history was carved with strife, rebellion, and the ever-burning struggle for power. And as time marched forward, its influence would once more shape the events yet to unfold. For centuries, the wall stood tall, Westeros's northernmost boundary, guarding the realms of men from the vast, frozen wilds beyond. But even the mightiest wall could not hold back every threat. In 3000 BC, a people who lived outside the reach of kings and queens crossed its icy threshold. The free folk, known in the south as whitelings, these tribes carried with them a way of life unlike anything south of the wall. They were not beholden to lords or crowns. They answered to no throne. They lived unbound in scattered clans and small communities, choosing their leaders not by blood but by merit, strength, wisdom, or the respect they commanded. The free folk cherished their liberty above all. To them, the wall was not a shield, but a prisoner towering monument to division. They saw it as a line drawn by those who claimed the right to rule, separating the so-called civilized from the free. The free folk had no cities, no castles. When the long winters came and the land grew lean, they moved as they needed, sometimes by force. So, in 3000 BC, driven by the desperation of the cold and hunger, a host of wildlings crossed the wall. Covertly, boldly, they sought land food freedom. But the north was not undeft house, Stark. The ancient and enduring rulers of the region had long stood as the first and final defense against what lay beyond the wall. When the free folk came, it was the Starks who met them. Under the command of the head of House Stark, the north rallied, and the invaders were driven back, pushed once more into the wild lands of their birth. The invasion failed, but it left its mark. This skirmish set the tone for centuries of uneasy conflict between the free folk and the north. The relationship was layered, marked by both hostility and kinship. The wildlings were branded as savages by many, yet their culture was rich. They had their own myths, their own ways. They lived by choice, not by chain, to those behind the wall. The Night's Watch and the North were not guardians, but jailers, buriers to a birthright they refused to surrender. And yet, though tension simmered, there was always a strange understanding between the two peoples. Not enemies, not friends, just two parts of one land, divided by frost and memory. The failed invasion of 3000 BC was only the beginning. Again and again, the free folk would challenge the boundaries set by kings and laws. Their spirit, their hunger for freedom, never faded. That same fire would one day burn in a man named Mance Rayder, crow-turned-king who would rise from the Night's Watch and unite the free folk under one banner. But Mance's tale was yet to come. The struggle between the free folk and the North would endure, as would the winds that carried whispers of war and far to the south. As conflicts flared and kings squabbled, a new power watched silently from its volcanic perch, a power that would one day rise above them all. The history of Westeros is forever intertwined with the rise of the Targaryens, but their story begins long before they laid claim to a single stone of the Seven Kingdoms. In 114 BC, the Targaryen family fled the majesty of Valyria, leaving behind their ancestral empire to settle on a lonely, storm-racked island just off the coast of Westeros-Dragonstonne. It was not fate that led them there. It was a dream. Daenerys Targaryen remembered in history as Daenerys the Dreamer saw what others could not. In a vision, she glimpsed the end of Valyria, fire and death, the cities crumbling, the skies raining ash, a doom that would swallow the greatest empire the world had known. Her father, Lord Annar Targaryen, believed her, and belief meant exile. He did the unthinkable, he left. At the time, Valyria was the jewel of the world. It was the domain of dragon lords, of unmatched magic and dominion. Leaving it seemed madness, but Annar listened. He gathered his household, his wealth and his dragons, and sailed west, forsaking the empire and settling on Dragonstone. That act of faith saved them. 12 years later, Daenerys' vision came to pass. The doom of Valyria chain of cataclysmic volcanic eruptions reduced the empire to rubble and flame. The great cities fell. The dragon lords were consumed. The skies turned to fire. Of all the noble families, only the Targaryens survived. The fire was gone, but its blood lived on. Dragonstone volcanic, jagged and shrouded in mistbeg, came there. Refuge, its cliffs echoed with the cries of dragons. Beneath its surface lay veins of obsidian, the dark stone known as a material whose importance would one day transcend even magic. Here the Targaryens made their home. Though just one among many Valyrian families before the doom, they now stood alone, the last of the Dragonlords, the only ones left who could bend flame to will. The rest of Westeros remained embroiled in its own chaos feuds between lords, battles for crowns. But on Dragonstone the Targaryens waited. They watched, and they prepared. They knew that one day the time would come. From this bleak island they would launch their destiny. The dragons that once ruled the skies of Valyria would rise again, not over the ashes of the past, but over the kingdoms of Westeros. The Targaryens had survived the end of the world. Now they would reshape a new one. Their story had just begun, and on the continent, deep within the Riverlands, a name was about to rise from stone and blood, a name that would be feared long after the man who bore it turned to ash. Harrenhal. In 42 BC, Harrenhal, king of the Isles and Fire. They brought their faith. Their invasion, which would sweep across much of the continent, wasn't just a conquest of land, it was a conquest of belief. As the Andals made their way through the southern kingdoms, they converted many of the first men to the faith of the Seven, replacing the old traditions and beliefs that had long governed the land. The ancient gods of the forest, worshipped by the first men, were slowly pushed aside as the Seven gained dominance. The arrival of the faith didn't just change the way people worshipped, reshaped the very fabric of Westerosi society. With the Andals came new customs, laws, and a structured religious hierarchy that would become deeply entwined with the political landscape. The faith wasn't just a spiritual force, it was a political one. The establishment of the faith militant, a powerful religious order that wielded both sword and scripture, would later play a crucial role in the power struggles that gripped the realm. At the heart of the faith's influence was the High Septon, the spiritual leader of the Faith of the Seven. The position of High Septon carried immense weight, as those who held the title had the power to bless or curse the rule of kings. Over time, the High Septons would become some of the most influential figures in the realm, their decisions echoing through the halls of power. The Faith and the Iron Throne were often at odds, each struggling for control over the hearts and minds of the people. But the Faith of the Seven wasn't just a tool of power, it was deeply symbolic. Each of the seven aspects represented a different part of the human experience. The father stood for justice, the mother for nurturing, the maiden for innocence, the crone for wisdom, the warrior for strength, the smith for hard work, and the stranger, the most mysterious, represented death and the unknown. These aspects touched every corner of life, from birth to death, and shaped the way people in Westeros saw the world around them. As the faith took root in the southern regions of Westeros, its influence only grew stronger. Great septs were built, where the faithful would come to worship, pray, and seek guidance. Weddings, coronations, and even funerals were conducted under the watchful gaze of the Seven, weaving the religion into the very traditions of the realm. Over time, the Faith of the Seven became more than just a belief system, became a way of life. Yet even as the faith spread across Westeros, not all regions embraced it. In the north, where the first men had long held sway, the worship of the old gods endured. The weirwood trees and godswoods remained sacred, and the people of the north held fast to the traditions passed down through the generations. This divide between the old gods of the north and the seven of the south would become yet another fault line in the complex history of Westeros. And so, as the kingdoms of men rose and fell, the faith of the seven remained a constant presence, influence shaping the rulers who sought power and the people who lived under their rule. Like the wall in the north, the faith was a foundation, one that would withstand the tides of time, but also one that could become a battleground of its own. For while the faith preached unity and peace, its history was filled with strife, rebellion, and the constant struggle for control. And as with so many things in Westeros, the influence of the faith would play a role in events yet to come. For centuries, the wall stood as the northernmost boundary of Westeros, separating the realms of men from the vast frozen wilderness beyond. But even the mighty wall could not prevent every threat from crossing into the lands of the living. In 3000 BC, a group known as the Free Folk, often called wildlings by those in the south, managed to pass through the wall in an audacious invasion, bringing with them a culture and way of life vastly different from the feudal lords of Westeros. The Free Folk were not bound by the laws and traditions that shaped the lives of the people south of the wall, living beyond the reach of kings and queens. They valued their freedom above all else. To them, the wall was less a barrier of protection and more a symbol of separation, division between the so-called civilized world and their own. They rejected the hierarchy that ruled Westeros, seeing the crowns and castles as unnecessary shackles on the human spirit. Instead, they lived in small, scattered communities governed by leaders of their choosing, often selected by strength, wit, or respect. Their way of life, however, often brought them into conflict with the people of the north. The wildlings, unlike the Westerosi, did not build cities or keep extensive farms. When resources were scarce, particularly during the long winters, they sought them elsewhere, sometimes by force. And so, in 3000 BC, a group of free folk, driven by the harshness of their homeland, passed covertly through the wall and ventured south, seeking to claim land and resources that were otherwise denied. To them, but the north was not unguarded. House Stark, the ancient rulers of the north, had long been the first line of defense against any who sought to cross the wall. When the free folk invasion began, it was the Starks who met them in battle. Under the leadership of the head of House Stark, the northern armies were able to repel the invaders, driving the wildlings back beyond the wall. The invasion, though ultimately unsuccessful, was a clear signal of the tensions that would continue to brew between the North and the free folk for centuries to come. The relationship between the free folk and the people of the North was and remains complicated. While the wildlings were often seen by the people of Westeros as savage and lawless, their culture was far richer than many gave them credit for. They had their own traditions, their own legends, and their own sense of governance, one that was built on freedom rather than fealty. In many ways, they were misunderstood by those who lived within the structured society of the Seven Kingdoms. To the wildlings, the men of the Night's Watch and even the people of the North were not protectors, but oppressors, barriers to a life they believed was their birthright. And yet, for all their differences, there was a reluctant understanding between the free folk and those who lived south of the wall. They were not entirely enemies, nor could they be considered allies. They shared a land divided by ice, bound by a history of conflict and survival. The events of 3000 BC would set the tone for many future clashes between the free folk and the North. And though this particular invasion was thwarted, the spirit of defiance and freedom that drove the wildlings would not fade. The wildlings saw themselves as more than just invaders. They were people fighting for the right to live on their own terms, free from the rigid rules of kings and lords. That same spirit would later find its embodiment in Mance Rayder, a man born a member of the Night's Watch who defected to the free folk, eventually becoming their leader and uniting their scattered clans. Though Mance's story unfolds long after the events of this particular invasion, his belief in the freedom of the free folk and his determination to breach the wall would reflect the same desires that had driven the wildlings centuries earlier. The tension between the wildlings and the North was far from over, and as the winds of winter began to stir once more, the struggle between the free folk and the men of Westeros would rise again. Would you like me to continue rewriting the next section? Starting with the history of Westeros is forever entwined with the rise of the Targaryens and blood that once ruled the realm. That blood did not vanish with the last breath of a dragon. The hope, the flickering, stubborn hope that these winged flames might return, never truly died. Across the centuries, it haunted the dreams of many that whisper in the dark that the dragons might fly again. Centuries passed, and then, a spark, Daenerys Targaryen, the last scion of her shattered house, stood alone in a world that had forgotten what fire could do. But when all else seemed lost, she performed the impossible. She hatched 3 dragons of her own. Dragon, Rhaegal, Viserion. Their names carried echoes of her past, and their wings split the sky as no dragon had done for generations. With their return came more than just fear. Awe followed in their wake. Reverence, a kind of old, deep reverence for something the world thought it had buried. Through Daenerys, the legacy of the dragons was reborn, a legacy not only of fire, but of ancestry, of dreams, of House Targaryens, ancient might. She had rekindled the force that had shaped the fate of Westeros once before, and now it had returned. Yes, the last dragon had perished in 153 AC, but the fire never went out. In Daenerys, the blood of the dragon still ran, fierce and unyielding. And as time would show, sometimes all it takes is a single spark to awaken the flame of a forgotten age. For nearly 3 centuries, House Targaryen ruled over Westeros long after the dragons had gone. Their wings no longer darkened the skies, but the family's legacy, forged in fire and blood, remained potent. Yet in the final years of their reign, that legacy began to flicker. What had once burned brightly now cast only long shadows. The realm teetered on the edge of collapse. At the center of that unraveling stood King Aerys too, remembered forever as the Mad King. A reign that once showed promise slowly crumbled into cruelty, paranoia and madness, giving rise to one of the most pivotal upheavals Westeros would ever know, Robert's Rebellion. But Aerys had not always been a tyrant. In his youth, he was vibrant, filled with hope, a king who might have restored the honor of the Targaryen line. Yet, as the years wore on, his mind frayed, fear took root, and with it came suspicion, then rage, then fire. His rule was marked by blood and screams. He became obsessed with enemies, both real and imagined. Convinced that betrayal lurked behind every door, he turned to wildfire as his answer, burning alive those he deemed disloyal, his cruelty growing more grotesque with every passing year. It was not madness alone that lit the spark of rebellion. It was a single act in 282 AC. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Aerys's beloved eldest son, allegedly abducted Lyanna Stark, the betrothed of Robert Baratheon, a fiery lord of the Stormlands. The realm held its breath. For House Stark and House Baratheon, 2 ancient families bound by pride and honor. The act was intolerable, and so the blood began to flow. What began as a conflict of love or perhaps obsession became open war. Eddard Stark, Robert Baratheon, and Jon Arryn raised their banners. The realm shattered into war. Many of the great houses, long alienated by Aerys's madness, saw in Robert a chance to rid the realm of the Targaryens once and for all. The war for the Iron Throne had begun. Robert Baratheon, bold and thunderous, charged into history. His warhammer shattered skulls and forged legend. On the banks of the Trident, Robert met Rhaegar in single combat. There, beneath the shadow of fate, the 2 men clashed. Steel rang, water churned red, and when it ended, Robert's warhammer broke Rhaegar's chest. The river claimed the prince's body. The rubies from his armor scattered into the current like fallen stars. With Rhaegar dead, the cause of House Targaryen faltered. But the death blow came not in the field, but in the capital, as King's Landing fell to the rebels. Aerys, too mad with desperation, ordered his pyromancers to set the city aflame with wildfire. He would burn his own people, his own throne, rather than let it fall into enemy hands. But his madness met steel. Said Jaime Lannister, a knight of the Kingsguard sworn to protect Aerys, chose betrayal. He drove a sword into the king's back before the order could be carried out. The Mad King's final breath was taken not in fire, but in blood. That single act, seen by many as treachery, would mark Jaime forever as the Kingslayer. But in his own soul, it was a choice made to save thousands. With Aerys dead, the dynasty crumbled. Robert Baratheon took the Iron Throne, and so ended 3 centuries of Targaryen rule. The survivors Viserys and the infant Daenerys fled across the sea, exiled to lands far from the throne their blood had once ruled. The dragon's fire had dimmed, but the embers remained. They carried within them the burning dream of return. Robert's rebellion ushered in a new age for Westeros. Yet it also marked the beginning of a long and perilous road, one that would see the Targaryens rise again, though their downfall seemed inevitable by the end. The rise of the Targaryens had been just as steeped in fire and mystery. Aegon the Conqueror had brought 6 of the 7 kingdoms to their knees, but one remained untouched: Dawn, the sun-scorched kingdom, with its jagged mountains and unyielding pride, resisted in a way no other land could. Where others bent the knee, Dawn defied, not with strength of armies, but with shadow and sun, desert and delay. Even mighty Aegon could not break them. The Dornish, led by House Martell, refused to meet dragons in the open. Instead, they fought a different war: guerrilla tactics, silent strikes. Heat, hunger, and time were their weapons. Aegon's sister Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes fell to a Dornish bolt. Her body, it said, was never found. Still, Dawn endured. Years passed, and then something shifted. Peace, unexpected, improbable peace. It arrived not through battle, but in silence. Princess Daria Martell came to King's Landing, bearing the skull of Meraxes and a letter, a message from her father, Prince Nem or Dot. When Aegon read the letter, silence filled the hall. His expression turned grim. His hand clenched so tightly the parchment cut his flesh. He bled, and without a word, he cast the letter into the fire. What did it say? No one knows. The letter is lost to history, but its impact was undeniable. The conqueror, the man who had taken kingdoms by fire and sword, agreed to peace. Dawn would remain independent. Some believe Nymer held Rhaenys captive. Others think the letter revealed a secret so dark, so profound, that even Aegon turned away from war. Whatever it was, it changed the course of history. Aegon later travelled to Sunspear himself. There, he and Nymer sealed peace not with flame, but with understanding. Dawn would eventually join the realm not through conquest, but through marriage. Yet the letter remains a mystery, a whisper lost to time. Was it a threat, a plea, a truth, too terrible to repeat? We may never know, but it brought fire to a halt, and that is its own kind of power. Now, as we pass through the myths and truths of Westeros, we arrive at one of the most haunting legends of all, the tale of Azor Ahai and the prophecy of the prince that was promised. Not all history is swords and crowns. Some of it belongs to shadows and stars, to prophecy. During the long night, when the world fell into blackness and the dead marched, a hero rose. Azor Ahai. He was not just a warrior, he was chosen to lead, to save, to bring light into a world overrun by shadow. But the forging of Lightbringer, his sword, was not a tale of steel and fire alone. It was a tale of love, of loss, of sacrifice. 3 times he tried. First he tempered the blade in water. It shattered then in the heart of a lion. Again it broke. But on the 3rd attempt he turned to Nyssa his beloved, and with trembling hands he plunged the sword into her heart. Her cry, they say, cracked the sky. Her blood awakened the blade. Lightbringer burned with a light that could drive back the darkness. With this sword, Azor Ahai saved the world. But the prophecy did not end there. One day, it is said, he will return, when the darkness rises again. so will Azor Ahai born as the prince that was promised. The followers of R'hllala, the Lord of Light, await this return. They whisper his name in fire. They dream of his coming, and when the long night threatens once more, the prophecy rises again. But who is he? Stannis Baratheon, grim and unyielding, was once thought to be the one. The Red Priestess Melisandre believed it saw it in the flames. She shaped kingdoms by that faith. She burned for it, but doubt crept in. Then came Jon Snow, born in mystery, killed, raised, a leader of men and a warrior in the dark. Many saw in him the shadow of Azor Ahai, and Daenerys Targaryen, born of fire, mother of dragons she, to became a vessel for prophecy. Her journey, her pain, her fire, they all spoke of Lightbringer. Was it her? Was it him? The truth remains elusive. The prophecy, like a flame in the wind, flickers between them. Yet to the followers of Lawler, it is more than law. It is purpose. It is hope, and it will burn until the darkness comes again. While exploring the fist of the first men remote, ancient place layered in mystery, and Snow members of the Night's Watch came upon something buried deep in the frozen earth. It was a cache wrapped in black cloak, hidden beneath a cairn of stones. Inside, they found dragon glass, daggers, obsidian blades, sharp as moonlight, tanned alongside them. An ancient horn, cracked, weathered, and unremarkable in appearance. The horn bore no markings, no glowing runes or sigils, and yet it carried a quiet, chilling weight. Some among them whispered it could be the horn of winter itself, the very relic spoken of in the oldest tales. Could this battered object truly be the key to breaking the wall? Could it summon giants from their graves, or worse, awaken shadows long buried beneath the ice? Samwell Tarly, the steward with a scholar's heart, took the horn and the dragon glass into his care, uncertain of their true nature, but unwilling to discard them. What followed was a slow, haunting shift in the wind. The presence of the horn seemed to stir something old in the dark, the whispers of an age not forgotten, merely sleeping, though no one had sounded it, not yet. The idea of what it might do lingered over the realm like a threat unspoken. Some feared that if blown, the horn would crumble the wall to ruin, tearing apart the barrier that had kept the dead at bay for 8,000 years. Others believed it would unleash forces from the far north, the others, the White Walkers, and their long night reborn. The true power of the horn, if any, remained uncertain, but legend has never needed certainty to thrive. In the windswept silence beyond the wall, stories echo like footsteps in snow, growing louder as the darkness gathers. The horn, real or not, had returned to the tail dot, and in the coldest corners of Westeros, where the fire of men flickers dimly against the endless night, even the faintest rumor of such a weapon is enough to shape fates. Whether the horn of winter will sound, and whether the wall will fall because of it, remains to be seen. But the shadow it casts is long and cold and very real, and even the resurrection of Jon Snow, yes, even that was entwined with her belief in this ancient prophecy. Melisandre saw herself as an instrument of the Lord of Light, sent to ensure Azor Ahai's rebirth would come to pass. At its heart, the story of Azor Ahai speaks to a truth older than stone and deeper than steel, that great heroes must be willing to make great sacrifices. Just as Azor Ahai once plunged his sword into the heart of the woman he loved to awaken Lightbringer, those who would rise as the prince that was promised must be ready to give everything for the realm, for the people, for the light. This theme of sacrifice and destiny and the lonely burden of leadership is woven into the very fabric of Westeros. It haunts the steps of every ruler, and whispers in the dreams of every would-be savior. As the final chapters unfold, the question still remains unanswered. Who truly is Azor Ahai reborn? Is it Jon, risen from death with fire still in his soul? Is it Daenerys with her dragons, her fire, her fury? Or could it be someone else entirely, unknown even to prophecy? We do not yet know. But whether it is Jon, Daenerys, or another soul cast from shadow into light, the legend of the prince that was promised continues to live in the minds of both the people of Westeros and those who read their tailor symbol of hope and a warning of the steep cost that must be paid to keep darkness at bay. And as we journey deeper into the long night of memory, we find ourselves walking beside other tales, ones not told in great halls, but passed from lips to lips in windswept camps and flickering firelight. Among the free folk, there is one such legend, a story laced with cunning, romance, and sorrow. The tale of Bael the Bard. He was more than a raider, more than a whisper from the north. Bael was charm and cleverness personified, his wit as sharp as his blade. His tale begins not with bloodshed, but with insult. Lord Brandon Stark of Winterfell, it is said, offended Bael, and Bael did not forget. But rather than draw sword or spill blood, Bael chose a subtler revenge. Disguised as a singer, Bael crossed into Winterfell, cloaked in music and words. His songs enchanted the court, and when Lord Brandon offered him a reward, Bael asked for the most beautiful flower in Winterfell's gardens. Lord Brandon, unaware of the trap laid before him, handed over a blue winter rose, a flower, rare and haunting dot. By morning, the girl was gone. Lord Stark's only daughter had vanished from her bed, and in her place was left only that single blue rose. Panic spread like frost. The Stark line, with no heir, stood on the brink of extinction. But the girl had not been stolen. She had gone willingly, and she had not gone far. For years, she and Bael lived in secret beneath Winterfell itself, hidden in the silent crypts. And from there, love came a child, a boy born of two worlds, Stark and free folk. No one knew, at first, who he was. And when Bael and the Stark maiden finally emerged, that boy, unknown to all, would grow to become the next Lord of Winterfell. The same line Bael had nearly ended, he had restored. But in Westeros, no tale of love ends untouched by sorrow. Time passed. The child became a man. Bael returned beyond the wall to his people and his old ways. And when war came between the free folk and the North, fate played its cruelest hand. On the battlefield, father and son met in combat, knowing of the blood they shared. The son, believing Bael an enemy, struck him down and carried his severed head back to Winterfell in triumph. It was only then, only upon seeing his face, that the truth was known. And the woman who had once loved Bael, who had borne his son, was shattered by the grief. She ended her own life, broken by the weight of what had been lost. To the free folk, Bael remains a hero, a legend, a testament to the power of wit over might. To the Starks, he was a thief and a ghost who nearly unravelled a house. But the truth, as always, lies somewhere in between: a man who loved, who defied, who was consumed by fate. Bael's story reflects a deeper divide, the chasm between free folk and kneelers, between duty and desire, tradition and freedom. In this, he is mirrored by another child of two worlds, Jon Snow. He too was torn between the Watch and the Wildlings, between loyalty and love, between the wall and the open. Wind. Just like Bael, Jon would be shaped hand scarred by both. And so the tale of Baal the Bard, whispered in the winds and carved in quiet, becomes not only a legend of love and revenge, but a shadowed echo of the greater tapestry of Westeros. Among these woven threads lies the softest, saddest of all, the tale of Jenny of Old Stones. Jenny, not noble nor rich, but a girl of laughter and light, lived far from court and crown. But fate, ever watchful, placed her in the path of Prince Duncan Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne, son of kings, meant for greatness, and he fell in love, not with power or duty, or the Baratheon bride chosen for him by King Aegon V, but with Jenny, a girl of the woods, of song, of simple wonder. For love of her, Duncan gave up the throne. He cast aside duty, rejected royal expectation, and married Jenny of Old Stones. It caused a storm. Aegon V, the unlikely king, was furious. He tried to undo the marriage, to restore Duncan to his path. But Duncan would not bend. His love was his crown. Jenny, though never crowned, became a quiet part of Targaryen legend, not through fire or conquest, but through her friendship with the ghost of High Heart, a prophetic seer whose words shaped prophecy itself. It was she who foresaw that from the union of Aerys and Rhaella, marriage arranged by Aegon after Duncan's defiance, would come the prince that was promised. Rhaegar Targaryen would be born of that line, and so Jenny, by love, played a part in shaping destiny. But her story ends, like so many, in fire. At Summerhole, where King Aegon V sought to hatch dragons and rekindle lost glory, something went horribly wrong. A great fire consumed the hall. Many died, among them Aegon, Duncan, and Jenny. Her death became a memory wrapped in ash, yet her love endured. In Westeros, her story is sung a song as soft as tears, as haunting as snowfall. Jenny of Old Stones. It is called a ballad of ghosts and love that lingers after death. She was not born a princess, but she died a legend, and as the legends of Westeros unfold, we find another relic, not of love, but of power. The Horn of Winter, said to bring down the wall itself, said to wake giants from the earth. Its story begins with Joramun, a king beyond the wall. He blew the horn, they say, and ancient things stirred. The Horn of Winter became a symbol of freedom for the free folk, of dread for those behind the wall, and in the story of a song of ice and fire, the horn resurfaces. At the Fist of the First Men, Samwell Tarly finds a horn buried beside dragonglass. Cracked, weathered, could it be the horn of legend? None can say. Its powers are untested, unknown. Later, Mance Rayder, king beyond the wall, claims to possess it. He threatens to blow it unless the Night's Watch opens the gates and allows his people through. But his horn is a bluff, a fake, a symbol, not a weapon. The real horn, if it still exists, remains hidden, sleeping. Yet the idea of the Horn of Winter lives on. It is more than wood or bone. It is the power to undo boundaries, to shatter the wall, to unbind magic. For the wall is not just ice. It is history. It is memory. It is the last defense against whatever lies beyond. If the horn were real, if it were ever blown, the world would change, and somewhere beyond the wall, another legend stirs in the cold. The Night's King, a man once noble, once chosen, once human. He was the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, strong, charismatic, but in the long frost of his command, he encountered her, a woman with skin like ice. Some say she was a White Walker, others say worse. But whoever she was, he loved her. He made her his queen. Together, they ruled from the Nightfoot, casting shadows and curses. The Night's king bent his brothers to his will, ruled with fear and dark sorcery. Some whisper he sought to turn the wall itself into a gate. Not a barrier, it took 2 kings to end his reign. Brandon, the breaker of the north, and Joramun beyond the wall. Together they shattered his power. But so terrible was his legacy, so shameful his betrayal, that his name was struck from all records. Only the wind remembers him now, and in that whisper, in the icy silence of the far north, some believe the Night's king lives on, not in flesh, but in echoes. The White Walker, king of the show, his creation, a symbol, a warning, a mirror to that ancient, cursed love, a reminder that in the end, the greatest fall is not from power but from grace, and the seduction of power by forces beyond understanding both. The Night's king and the Night King stand as grim reminders that the wall, though built to protect, can just as easily conceal what festers in shadow. It is not merely a line of stone and ice, it is the fragile, flickering border between man and the unknown, between order and chaos, between the living and the dead. The tale of the Night's king, though erased from the annals of history, still echoes across the frozen winds of the far north. A chill that never truly fades, a warning that some forces cannot be easily defeated, nor ever truly forgotten. There are many references to the old gods throughout Westeros, yet their presence is more often felt than seen. Unlike the faith of the Seven, with its septs and shining temples, the old gods are stitched into the bones of the land itself. Their influence is older than empire, and as the hills and woods, their watchful silence stretches back to the age of the first men and the children of the forest, long before thrones were built or crowns forged. They gaze out from the faces carved into weirwood's white bark. Blood red leaves silent witnesses to oaths, prayers, and whispered secrets spoken beneath their boughs. The old gods were once the only gods of the first men, who crossed from Essos into Westeros thousands of years ago. When they first arrived, they warred with the children of the forest, cutting down sacred weirwoods in a struggle for dominion. But even the first men, hardened by conquest, could not deny the deep power that hummed in the roots of these ancient trees. And so, after years of bloodshed, the first men and the children forged the pact, ending their war and uniting in the worship of the old gods. From that pact forward, the first men wove the old gods into their beliefs. Their descendants, especially in the north, still whisper their names and keep their silence beneath the leaves. Weirwoods, those trees with solemn carved faces and red sap like bleeding eyes, are at the very heart of this forgotten religion. They are not merely symbols. They are said to be eyes through which the old gods still watch. In the north, groves known as godswoods are sacred. There, under snow or summer shade, the faithful come not to speak to septons or bend before altars, but to kneel in silence, hoping to hear the rustling of leaves, to feel some ancient presence press gently on their spirit. These trees have endured thousands of years. Through them, the old gods remain ever vigilant. The bond between the old gods and their followers runs deeper than reverence. It is something older than language, something lived. Certain rare souls are called greenseers, those who can see through the eyes of the weirwoods, touching past, present, and future. Bran Stark, whose path as a greenseer is among the most fateful in the saga, learns to wield this gift, tapping into the old gods in ways few have dared. Greenseers like Bran serve as living bridges between the waking world and that other realm that thrums beneath the bark of trees and the breath of wind. And there are others, Tuskinchangas, those who can step into the minds of beasts and live through their eyes. This power, too, flows from the same river, the sacred bond between nature and the divine. Jon Snow's connection to his direwolf ghost and Bran's bond with summer are not mere tricks of fate, but threads of something more ancient, evidence that the old gods watch not only over men, but over all life that stirs and breathes under their trees. The worship of the old gods stands in stark contrast to the organized grandeur of the faith of the Seven. Where that faith has hierarchy and law, the old gods have only silence and stone. There are no priests, no holy texts, no doctrines, just the weirwoods, just the land. The faith is solitary, intimate, an inward call to something older than language. In the north, houses like the Starks have never let go of this. Their God is a place of quiet strength, and their vows are sworn before those ancient eyes. For the free folk beyond the wall, the old gods are even more primal. These are people who live closer to the land, who hear the wind and feel the hunger of the earth. For them, the old gods dwell not only in trees, but in water, sky, and stone. Their prayers are whispered not in temples, but to snow and river and fire. Their faith is raw. Like the world they endure a bond of survival, a pact with the untamed. The symbolism of the old gods cuts deep. They represent the ancient, pulsing magic of Westeros, the power of the wild before it was tamed by lords and laws. They are the roots under the castles, the winds behind the banners. While kings and queens rise and fall, while swords are drawn and thrones contested, the weirwoods remain silent, waiting. Their power is subtle, but it pierces. In moments of great turning, they are there. In Bran's visions, in Jon's silent bond with Ghost, in the prayers whispered at Winterfell. Even in a world consumed by politics and conquest, the old gods endure. They are the watchers in the trees, the breath of something older than man, older than war. Their magic, though quiet, still pulses beneath the world, waiting for the moment it will rise again, and not all the tales of the knights watch are stories of valor or victory. Some are darker, some are warnings carved into the very ice of the wall. Among the most chilling of them is the tale of the 79 Sentinels, a grim reminder of what it means to break one's oath. Their story is not only about punishment, it is about honor, duty, and the unforgiving cost of betrayal. It begins with desertion, the most shameful crime a brother of the Night's Watch can commit. 79 men once sworn to protect the realm fled their posts, abandoning their brothers, their vows, their duty. Desperate, they sought refuge with Lord Rel, hoping blood would shield them from justice. But they misjudged the weight of the black cloak. They misjudged the heart of a man bound by honor. Lord Rel, though kin to one of the deserters, his own son made a choice that would echo through time. He chose duty over blood. He chose honor over the comfort of love. And so, with a heart no doubt heavy, he returned all 79 men to the wall, including his son. He knew what awaited them, death, but he also knew that to shelter them would be to break the realm's last defense. The Lord Commander of the Watch, bound by the ancient laws of their order, had no mercy to give. Yet he did not offer the blade either, not a quick death, not even the dignity of the noose. No, he sealed them one by one in to the very ice of the wall, their frozen bodies facing north, forever turned toward the dark wilderness they had once sworn to guard. In life, they had abandoned their post. In death, they would never leave it again. Their punishment was eternal. They left their posts in life, the Lord Commander said, so in death their watch goes on forever. A sentence, not meant merely for them, but for all who would follow. A message carved in cold. To take the black is to take a vow unbreakable. The wall must not fall to weakness, to betrayal, to fear. Bran Stark remembered their tale. He told it to Mira Reed as they wandered through the white silence beyond the wall. It was not just a story to him. It was a part of his blood, a reflection of the weight that hung heavy on all who had worn black. It was a story about what men must sacrifice for the realm, what his own kin had given up, lands, names, love. The men of the Watch had no wives, no sons, no glory. Their only reward was duty. Their only legacy was the wall. And for those who broke that sacred trust, there was no redemption, no grave, no peace. Only ice, the 79 sentinels, still wait in the wall. Frozen, silent, watching, their presence is a warning. Passed from brother to brother, this is what it means to take the black. To break the oath is not only to betray the Watch, is to betray all of Westeros. Their vigil, carved in frost, reminds us that the wall is not only a barrier of stone and snow, it is a monument to sacrifice, to loyalty, to unbreakable promise. For those who take the black, there is no turning back, no escape. The wall is home, the wall is life, and, if need be, the wall is death.